Folks, we are live. Of course, when I say that moment, I want to belch, but all right, I'll blame Mike. In any case, this is what are we doing, Mike? Talking
I don't
crit?
talking crit. I mean, is that the
Yeah,
time?
I was to say, yeah. What are we doing, Mike? And we just lost.
Oh no, we lost our
Holy
special guest.
shit!
Oh,
all right, we'll have to. It's the Canadian internet. We'll have there he goes. Now he's back. You know what it was? Greg didn't like being next to me because then he could be associated as my work spouse. So he figured he needed to be by himself on the screen below us. So,
well, it was interesting because in the little interface here, it was asking me to log in, and I wasn't sure if the chat was going to populate.
I made that mistake
or not.
before. Yeah, I made that mistake before too. It just kicks you out. It's stupid.
So I may not be able to see people if they post questions or not. Maybe you could help me out.
Well, I'll tell you how to do it. I do it at the same time. You just pull up YouTube, pull up the video, don't play the video at the same time because you'll hear too many voices, and then you can actually post the video. But make sure you're logged into YouTube also.
Okay, we'll do.
And just either turn the sound off or just pause it, and then you'll be fine.
I'll also be putting everything up on the screen as it comes across. Yeah.
Okay.
But all right, so folks, that's the wonderful introduction. I am obviously Eric Tenkar. The individual on this side of me now, who was below me but now is beside me, is none other than Bad Mike, best known for North Texas RPG Con, and my once-a-week work spouse. Because we keep it real.
Yes.
And
looking below us, I see one of the special guests for North Texas RPG Con this year.
Well, then do the introduction, Mike.
Well, this is Mr. Dr. Greg Gillespie, Mr. Greg Gillespie, professor of what's exactly? I know it's RPGs. It's not RPG studies. What's the technical name of what you do, Greg?
Well, I'm in a department of basically cultural studies. So
cultural studies.
Yeah, we have people
specializing in RPGs, right? I mean, you do a lot of RPG stuff. So
I do RPG stuff. Yeah.
And also, so this is one of the reasons why so I talk about Greg as my man crush. And so for those who don't understand what a man crush is, it is a man that you wish you were. So for instance, John Peterson's one of my man crushes too. I mean, the guy writes books about RPG history, jets around the world, hobnobs with the rich and famous. Well, Greg teaches a class in RPGs, and he publishes RPGs, specifically Mega Dungeons in his own world. And we're up to 3 and counting now. We have Barrowmaze, we have Forbidden Caverns of Archaia, and we have HighFell, which my group has been going through now for 2.5 years. They're up to about, I looked the other day, I haven't wrote down like the last 6 sessions. We're up to about almost 30 sessions in there, because we only venture about once a month. So, and he's got another mega dungeon coming out, taking place in the same world, called Dwarrowdeep, which I think is a little different from the rest of them in that it's got kind of a different theme, and it has to do with dwarves, correct? Dwarves in the underground. So, Greg's got that coming out this summer. That was a Kickstarter, and after that, it'll be available to the general public. And then he also he's got lots of things to talk about. And I've talked about this a little bit about this with Greg over the last few months. He's got all kinds of little revelations to do here. So we're just going to hand it over to him and let him, whatever he wants to talk about, we're going to talk about too, because Greg's interesting to talk to.
Thanks, guys. So I'm very excited. I've just got the first print proof of Dwarrowdeep, so I'll share that with you. So,
nice. Yes.
We're looking at here. Sorry, there's some glare. I apologize for that.
Nice.
So
I'm already seeing a different look because you don't have an Otis cover, the first non-Otis cover, it looks like.
Yeah, so this cover was done 2 years ago, actually.
Wow.
So this was the first thing that was done because I knew what I wanted right off the bat. And this is the cover, sort of, you get one impression, you look a little closer and you see a little more. So that's what I was sort of hoping to do with it. And it's one of the things I wanted to do, inspired by the sort of images running along there are like 4 pages in the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide that sort of show sort of a introductory level party moving through and sort of advancing in level and fighting different monsters. And what I did was I was thinking pie in the sky and then working back from there. And I thought, no, I'm doing pie in the sky. So I've got 150 pages.
Oh my God.
Of unique zipitomes running along that correspond with the content of the page. And these are really fun, and they tell a story along the bottom that that I think people will get some chuckles from, and they'll also see the common things adventurers do, and they'll see surprise things, and they tell a story of I established a group of iconic sort of pre-generated characters very early in the prototyping, and then we used those as the basis. So it's the pre-generated characters that you see running through the course of the adventure from start to finish, which is a lot of fun. The real sort of masterpiece, which I can also share with you, this is sort of like my working copy. The real masterpiece is the hex map. So this is my working copy. So get ready to screen cap if you're at home. I've never really seen anything quite like this in RPGs, and I hope it's finds its inspiration in early subterranean adventures, but then it has my own sort of unique feel, and that map will be available digitally. It'll be, of course, in the book, but then it'll be available to print like a poster like that, both in black and white and old school blue. So cayenne. So I'm really excited about that.
Kind of a descent in the depths type of underground type map. I mean, that's always
but way bigger, way cooler. So if you've run Descent into the Depths, you're going to see some things that are familiar, and yet you're going to see things that are new as well. And I always, as you know, I always like to pay homage to the past, because those are the people who charted our hobby, and pay respect to them while also putting my new thoughts and spins and design ideas in there. So I'm really excited about that. It's a real masterpiece. It's a thing of beauty, and I'm really excited to share it with people when the time comes.
Nice. We got some people in the chat that are very excited about the work that you're showing, so that's always a good sign.
Yeah, and so what Dwarrowdeep does is like I was always when I was because I'm tall, I was always fascinated when I role play by playing dwarves. It's always been my thing. I wanted to know what the world was like being about 4'2", and that's just sort of like one of those quirks. Some people like playing elves for whatever reason. Some people like playing clerics, which I do that. I enjoy that too. But right. Dwarves are sort of where my heart is with role-playing games. I know a lot of people out there feel the same. And in consideration of that, and in consideration of sort of Lord of the Rings, Moria being sort of like the first prototypical dungeon to me, I never really thought that there was a modular adventure that really truly found a merging of Tolkien's Moria with Dungeons and Dragons. And so there have been some attempts, but let's face it, they're mostly lame, and they're not really expansive, and they don't really do justice. And so what I wanted to do with this project was find that sort of harmonious balance between references to Anglo-Saxon culture, Viking culture that Tolkien used as inspiration, right, and yet making it playable and gameable and fun like Dungeons and Dragons and OSR adventures. So what this does, I feel it really merges those two things. It's definitely going to be the biggest dwarven sandbox mega dungeon ever created. And I'm really excited and very thankful that people supported me in the Kickstarter.
Well, you've gotten pretty good support in Kickstarters in the past. You're one of those like proven entities. When you put out a new project, people don't go. Put it this way, I don't get PMs from people going, "What do you think about Greg Gillespie's latest project? Do you think it's something I should be backing?" I don't get those messages. I do get them from other people about other people, I don't get it when it comes to you because, again, you're a known entity. People know what they're going to get from you.
Well, my job is to make sure you don't get harangued by people on the internet. So if I'm doing that, I'm succeeding.
Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay, Eric?
Yeah.
Okay, my headphones did crap out, so I'm going headphoneless. I'm going headphoneless the rest of the night. My fault for not charging them out, but so so you've done this. So it's really interesting. So the mega dungeons you've done, they all have a different twist to them. Barrowmaze is one level, a gigantic tomb that basically there's a lot of undead. It's different from a lot of other dungeons of that your main foes are undead and and it's in the middle of this giant graveyard. And so you kind of have that theme going there. And then the Forbidden Caverns for Archaia, very much, I think, inspired by Caves of Chaos. There's a large area there with all these different caves with different humanoids in all the caves. Some have monsters, some have, puzzles or treasures. But it's more of like an area, and you go in different. You can choose what caves or what structures you go in, and then the HighFell, which is different than both of those. It's a giant floating dungeon. There's this giant chunk of land, and there's all these wizards towers on there, and so you have to not only get up to you have to find a way up to there. You also can explore. It's kind of sandboxy, whichever way you want to go. Although there's kind of an overlaying theme. How is this one different and the same than your other mega dungeons?
Well, the main item I would say that's different would be so all my dungeons to this point have been complete, ready to play. The DM doesn't have to do a whole lot. Maybe dice a couple tables relative to a tavern patron generator or something like that. But basically, it's all set to go. This one, I have detailed the main, what I call primary encounter areas. And then I've created a generator for secondary encounter areas if the person running the game wants to use them. But I've made it very user-friendly, and it has application well beyond this adventure. So if you wanted to, like in Barrowmaze, I had the random crypt generator. So if people wanted to throw in some small crypts as sort of low-hanging fruit, you could do that. This one takes that idea, expands it, and then if you just wanted to poach the generator out of it to make some of your own stuff, it has tons of replayability in that regard. So I've detailed all the primary encounter areas that hold the adventure together and bind it together, but I've also provided the person jamming or DMing with enough agency to create their own little areas informed by the primary encounter areas. So that's fun and exciting, and I hope that that it gives people a little bit of agency as well to feel they can take the secondary encounter areas and put their own little flair on it, and yet still in under the umbrella of the Dwarrowdeep adventure.
Now, you have to be. This is Dwarrowdeep. This is going to have to do with dwarves. Do you have to be dwarves, or can you be any kind of party, or is this? In what way is this dwarf centric?
Well, so right now my group are playing 6 dwarves, and so there are basically the Dwarrowdeep, the mountains in where Dwarrowdeep are sort of located, are sort of the ancestral homeland for the dwarves. It's their where they were sort of created. And so when you're situated in Dwarrowdeep, there are advantages to playing a dwarf. What I like to do with each adventure is I like to put a little bit of pressure on one class or race. So in Barrowmaze, it was clerics. In HighFell, it's wizards. And in this example, it's dwarves. So, I mean, and dwarves in Dungeons and Dragons are like Klingons in Star Trek, right? And I'm not talking about the terrible most recent iteration of Star Trek. I'm talking about past versions of Star Trek. Like, people love Klingons. Like, who doesn't like Qapla' and Today's a Good Day to Die and all that stuff? And I think a lot of us that grew up playing the game, sort of like this idea of these dwarves, and they're a little bit xenophobic because they only really trust other dwarves because that's how they've sort of been forced to rely, and they're when they're sort of under siege, whether it's underground or by orcs or whatever. So they're slow to trust, and yet they're very loyal, and they're fun loving, and they're hardy warriors. And I just think there's a lot to build on there, and I tried to do that.
I've always been fascinated by the idea of. I always had this idea that I wanted to have a group and we all played one race, just for because most races can cover every character class, and I've always had a idea that I'd like to play a game of all halflings, all dwarves, all elves. This may be my all dwarf moment. I think I may do an all dwarf party just for fun, because this seems like that would allow that to happen pretty easily.
Yeah, I've put in example some common dwarven vocabulary to help players role play. I've put in some naming conventions that will also help players role play and situate them within the adventure. I've also I talk about dwarven clerics in a way that's a little bit different, similar to the past, but also has my spin on it that I think is a good in-world representation of what a dwarven cleric would mean to a community, and also what losing a dwarven cleric would mean to a dwarven community given a lower birth rate and that sort of thing. So I try to situate some of the dwarven classes characteristics in a way that makes in-world sense. And I definitely am not trying to step on people's toes. People have their own games to run. You can totally adapt it if you don't think it suits your game. But I am pleased with how that part of it turned out. And also dwarven beards. So dwarven beards communicate meaning to other dwarves, and humans might not understand it. Elves won't understand it, but dwarves communicate to each other through their beards. And so I talk a little bit about that, which also can help players role play if they want to avail themselves. I'm also really excited about the art's terrific. So Peter Pagano, who's done work all the way back to Barrowmaze Complete, he and I worked on the zipatomes that run along the bottom of the pages for 150 pages.
Wow.
Ken and James has done some stunning work in this adventure. I harassed Larry Elmore for literally a year, and finally he caved, and he did a terrific piece for me. Darlene has done a full-page piece as well, in addition to some monsters. Tim Truman has done multiple full-page pieces. I'm really
Tim Truman's great. I love that. Tim Truman, yes.
And Jeff D did a couple pieces as well. So I'm really excited. It's and in each of these examples, because I had the prototype characters done in advance, I sent those to each artist. So when they were representing characters, they were showing the pre-gens, but in their style. And I think it pulls all together quite nicely.
Somebody wrote here, can we still back Dwarrowdeep? Well, it's too late, but the good news is that Greg was just telling us he's going to. It should be out by August.
Yeah, after August, I'm hoping for early August. So we've got some. I plan. You saw the working proof. That's going to get iterated probably 3 more times at least, and just combing through it, trying to reduce the human error, because it's 140,000 words. It's the biggest book I've done, academic or RPG related. So I want to make sure that it's right on point, right from the word go. And so I'm going to keep iterating. And the only part that sucks is, drive-through is having delays with their plant. So by the time I order and receive it, it's taking about 30 days, which was unanticipated. But I also gave myself a little extra time, assuming COVID and other delays. So we're right on track and looking good at this stage here in February.
Nice.
Good deal. I'm excited about our. I wanted to do a, as I call it, Gillespie World dungeon for a while, and which I think is cool is all 3 of your dungeons are all connected. If you put a map out there, well, so the secret is not really secret. You use the outdoor survival map as your basis to put all the dungeons in. And so if you get the outdoor survival map there, you can see where all these dungeons are. I was really interested in wanting to choose a choose one of these to finally run, because I've been reading them for years, and we finally decided. I let my group choose. I said, "Here's what we got. We got this. We got this. We got this." They chose HighFell, which I thought was interesting, and so we've been in HighFell. So all they want to know now is when's Dwarrowdeep going to come out. I mean, they're still having fun in HighFell, but now that they know who you are, and they saw the whole Dwarrowdeep Kickstarter, and I think my brother backed it, maybe a couple of the other people in our group backed it. Now all they want to know is when we're going to do Dwarrowdeep. I'm like, and so you've built up a pretty good audience of people here that now you have your own kind of your brand, the Gillespie World brand, which is.
No, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add to that. I don't, as you know, I don't. I'm not really prone to flights of fancy or moments of the day in the RPG industry. I really don't give a shit about that at all. Orcs are bad. They're there to be killed. And the Dwarrowdeep is unabashedly Anglo-Saxon. So if you love medieval history, I did all my research. I was in archaeology journals. I was studying that very closely. I was studying naming conventions for runestones. I did this whole thing. Runestones are really important in dwarven culture, so I studied the syntax of Anglo-Saxon and Viking runestones, and then I created a random generator for those runestones, and it was connected to names and dates and places and battles, and then I could iterate that over and over and over to find the coolest ones, and I created 400, I think it's 400 random mundane runestone inscriptions. So that's super exciting. And I think that, the people that sort of appreciate Tolkien, appreciate Dungeons and Dragons, and appreciate Anglo-Saxon history are going to see that come out and see my passion and love for it. And I hopefully it merges it in a fun gaming experience.
I don't know. I'm a little anxious about buying it because in my world, orcs are they're kind of misunderstood, really. And maybe they just, they might have just had, a bad upbringing or something. And that doesn't mean they can't be good or bad or, whatever. So I don't know. I'm going to have a little problem with this.
Well, there you go. You can have a problem with it, but it's going to kick ass. So if you want to miss out, then I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, we could do a whole episode on nature versus nurture, and does the paladin kill the baby orcs or not?
Yeah.
That was a big question when I was in my upper teens. We killed the baby.
The dumbest arguments of one of the dumbest arguments in the last however many years. Orcs are look. Play the game however you want. If you want orcs to pick daisies and have puppies, I mean that's your game. Whatever. I mean the fact that WotC had to come out and say that hey, by the way, you can play the game the way you want to, but really this is really what we want you to do. It's just that's ludicrous. So I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't follow that. That's just bullshit to me. So those people who are looking for an old school gaming experience, you're absolutely going to find it. And let me share with you one of the Tim Truman full pagers of a white dragon.
Yeah. See, now Tim is a really favorite of mine. And for those that don't know the full history, Tim did some illustrations of some of the early D&D stuff, YouTube, and a couple of basic. But he also went on to a very successful career in comics. He did some great Jonah Hex comics. If you pick up his Jonah Hex stuff, it's incredible. And he also did a comic called Scout, which is his own. That was his own brand comic. It's really good. I think it's pretty hard to find now. It was through a company called I think First Comics.
It was First, and then I think I lost my
really good, very very good comic. It was.
That's what I was thinking about when you were talking about Tim Truman. That and some of my early Palladium stuff where I flipped through and I go.
He did Airboy with Chuck Dixon. Airboy's his stuff's good, and his stuff still looks great. A lot of his artists, their stuff might maybe doesn't look the same, but he's still doing comic art and it still looks really really nice. But yeah, if you get a chance, pick up his Jonah Hex. He's got a couple of stories. One's called Shadows West. I can't remember the other one, but he did a couple of like mini series, and it's like really. It's the most unpolitically correct comic of all time, but it's Jonah Hex, so it's of course it is.
Hex is not politically correct,
but he did a great job. So he's still churning out some really great art. And we've tried to have him as a guest a couple of years on North Texas. It just never worked out for us. He's always had something come along, but he's shown a willingness to be a special guest a few times. It just never worked out that we got him. We were able to get him those years.
Well, he's another guy I have to harass for a certain amount of time. And what I do is, with the people, I think pie in the sky, and then I work backwards. And I was like, okay, well, I know I'm going to have to work on him for at least 6 months. So I'm going to start now. This was long before the Kickstarter even happened. And it just kept, can we do this? I've got this idea. It's going to be really awesome. And one of the Tim Truman, I'm going to do a deep cut here. One of the most awesome Tim Truman illustrations came from Dragon Magazine, where he had this little this cut of a necromancer going into a tomb, and then basically he undergoes a process to sort of become a lich, and it's really amazing. And I wanted to bring that into Dwarrowdeep, so I've got a full. It's like a little comic strip, and I wanted to bring that into Dwarrowdeep. So we did a dwarven version of that I think is pretty cool. And I know there's going to be people out there who know what I'm talking about, and that's where that found the inspiration.
Somebody had a really good question there, and this is something that I know you've talked about a little bit. What version or game system do you write for?
So I've done Labyrinth Lord in the past, but I'm moving on from that. So I'm going to take this. So there's 2 projects in the works right now. So the Gillespie Monster Manual will come out later this year. I'm hopeful it'll also be in August. So there's that. And the reason I'm doing that is because I've got these 4 mega dungeons now, and some of them have very large monster sections. Like Forbidden Caverns had 100 monsters. Like I had to just draw a line at 100 monsters. So what I've done is I've taken all the monster illustration, all the monsters in those books, illustrations, some I've updated, and then I put them all together alphabetical in a monster book. And just to make it easier to run the adventures, because people were speaking on it, and I heard you, and that's why that's going to happen. So that's being laid out right now. And then the other part is that I'm going to take my home game and put it into a rule system, which I'll be writing to in the future. So it's using in the broad spectrum of clones. There's really no D&D 0.75 clone. We have BX clones, we have AD&D clones, but there's no 0.75 clone, and that's what I grew up playing. So we're using the basic engine and overlapping the Chrome of AD&D, and that's what I'm going to be doing. Just taking what I do in my home game and codifying it into a rule set. So that will probably be 2023. But I'm pecking away at it now and ordering illustrations for that monster section too. And so I want the layout to not only be very user friendly and newbie friendly, but I want the art to be kick ass. And I want the art to be, I don't want it fanciful. I don't want it, well, it's going to be steeped in the aesthetic of the OSR, and it's going to be steeped in the aesthetic of early Dungeons and Dragons, inspired by that. And I want the art to really speak as people are flipping pages, just like I've done in Dwarrowdeep, just like I've tried to do in Barrowmaze and HighFell and Forbidden Caverns.
So I thought that was an interesting decision when we talked about that, the kind of the jettisoning Labyrinth Lord. But I mentioned this to you, and this is true of anybody who's played old school D&D. But back in the day when we picked up an adventure module, we just ran it. We ran it for whatever system we were doing. And I'll give an example. Right now we're running HighFell. I'm running it for AD&D 2.0 because that's one of the games we grew up playing a lot of. We have all the rule books. We decided let's just use this. But when we started the game, the campaign, I didn't name a rule set. We played the whole first session without saying anything, and then afterwards I said, "What rule session do you think we were playing?" Everybody's like, "I don't know." Well, we weren't really playing. We were just playing what I call old school D&D, which is you kind of know this does this and everything. And I asked them, "What rule set would you like to play under?" They said, "Well, let's just make it 2.0 since that's the one we have all the rule books for." Fine. And that's the great thing about just doing what I call old school D&D is that you can take a book like Barrowmaze or Dwarrowdeep, and you can run it for without very much change at all. Run it for basic D&D, run it for BCMI, run it for OD&D, run it for AD&D first edition, run it for AD&D second edition. I mean, it's just very little change there. And then it also fits in with pretty much any retro clone if you do that also. You can run it with Swords of Wizardry. You can run it with Labyrinth Lord. You can run it with your own personal system. And that's one of the beauties of old school D&D. That's what we lost when 3.0 came out, because at the point we came out with D&D 3.0, it wasn't compatible at that point.
Right.
There's so many rules changes.
And having run HighFell, Mike, that like I've never written to Labyrinth Lord as written. I've always been pushing it closer to AD&D. It's just that's the closest version to what I was doing at the table, because it just uses the biacs engine. So I've always been pushing the boundaries of what that system could offer, and I just feel like this is sort of a natural evolution. So those of you who have Barrowmaze or Forbidden Caverns or HighFell, like don't think that anything's going to be changed in there. It won't, because this is how I run it at the table. I've been writing for that, and it's just time that I do something that's closer to what I have going on at my table. But mechanically, it will be the same.
And that's one of the things. Just personal note. That's Frog God Games. We've recently. Matt Finch has his own company now, Mythmere Games, where he's running Swords and Wizardry. And from here on out, most of Frog Games, I guess what we would have called Swords and Wizardry adventures years ago, are just going to be called old school. It's going to be called old school. It's be old school. And it's going to have a generic old school system that you can run with any of the retro clones or your favorite older system. And that, like I said, that's the beauty of old school. That's what's so great about it. Is it, we made these conversions in our head, because I know Eric grew up the same time I did. I mean, you picked up something like, B2, you just ran it. And then after that, you'd run Temple of Elemental Evil. Then after that, you ran, B1. Then after that, you ran Village of Hamlet. It was easy. You just picked it up and run it. You didn't even really have to make conversions.
Yeah, and that's what I want to do. And I just think that it's just time that this happens, and then I'll be able to publish to that. And I want to be crystal clear. I'm not going to be doing splat books. I have no intention of doing that at all. One rule set and simple, streamlined, easy to read, zero bloat, no needless words, fat trimmed. Presented with a nice aesthetic, with high-end art, so it'll be a joy to flip the pages, and the monster book will be the same way.
Nice. I mean, listen, you know my history. Not to say as a game designer, but in any case, in my gaming, simple is always better, because a simple book to reference at the table means less referencing at the table.
Yes.
I mean, I grew up using AD&D 1E, Player's Handbook, DMG, and sure, my pages are all earmarked by finger grease, so I can go open up to the combat tables in the DMG. I can open up to the Succubus in the Monster Manual, because I was like 13. But that's because we didn't care at that time. Now that I am older, I'm in my 50s. I want to, if I go reference an RPG book, I want to be able to find what I need if I need it, and then hopefully never need to look it up again. That it's a simple enough rule that once I've used it and run with it, it stays up here, not where it's like, oh, geez, we got flying creatures in AD&D 1E. Oh, God, this creature is E in its flight ability, and its fire. Oh, this other one is G. Where does that match up on this fucking sheet? I don't ever want to experience that shit again, ever.
Like, for example, like saving throws need to be in the character class section. Like they need to be right there. So, because everyone's always flipping, well, what page are the saving throws on? Like, let's just get rid of that nonsense. Like, that's just stupid. And attack matrices need to be in those spots too. They need to be, so you're running the cleric, boom, you go to the cleric section and there you go. And it shouldn't be a mystery where that stuff is buried halfway through a book. It's just ridiculous.
And then that's one of the really interesting things about the OSR is that, you know, a lot of people, I mean, a lot of people still play AD&D, but they use the Ostrich book. Why? Because the Ostrich book's better put together. I mean, a lot of these retro clones, the reason they use them over the original, I'll give you an example. BX, I love BX. That's my favorite con game. Whenever I run con games, I run BX.
Same.
But damn, the rules are a labyrinth. I mean, they're just, everything's all over the place. Well, that's why a lot of times I do BX, I just use Labyrinth Lord, because everything it's arranged much better. It's outlined much better. And that's one of the advantages we have with the retro clones, is that they took the original rules and they, you know, okay, this logically needs to be here. This logically needs to be there. That is a big, and that's why people always say, well, why would you, I don't understand. I have my first edition AD&D rule books. I'll just run out of that. Well, yeah, you don't have an index either, though.
Right.
And you know, you got to flip through other pages to find this and that. Ostrich has, you know, is much better put together. But it does matter. It does matter how nice the books are and how easily you can get to spots. I mean, I'm like Eric said, I mean, I'm old now. I don't want to have to flip through a book, you know, 10 times to try to find something. Just give it to me, and by this time, look, the hobby's been around 50 years. You've had enough time to figure the books out and to write them in a way I can understand them.
That's it. And not only that, you know, have a minimum with your font size. And you know, we're not getting any younger. And sometimes you don't have your glasses. So I want to make sure that's taken care of, squared away.
Because when I have to break these out, because I am old, there's an invisible bifocal line on these glasses. When I got to break this shit out to read it, like that's why, I mean, I've owned Arduin probably for the last 10 years. I bought the original trilogy on eBay. And when I first got it, I could barely read it, you know, without too much struggle. And what I read was enjoyable, but it wasn't enough for me to go back and go through that vision. And then I got a copy from Emperor's Choice of the original trilogy, re-edited, and instead of the little booklets, full size, 8.5 by 11. Yep.
Yeah, and you could actually read them. You could see it.
Yeah,
it's so great.
Even their small booklets are a readable font. So for books 4 through 9, you don't think of it when you're 20, or maybe even 30. You don't think of it. You're like, oh, I can read all of this shit. Okay, not a problem. And then you get older, and you're like, if I can't read it comfortably, I don't want to spend time.
That was our one complaint about the otherwise absolutely magnificent Swords of Wizardry box set, was that the font size was just simply too small for at least for me and Eric to use the table. It was otherwise beautiful box set, but the font size was unusable. I just can't read it. You know, I don't have time to do this as I'm trying to read a rule book. So, and by the way, one of the things I like about Greg's books is they are very, very readable. The font size has always been large enough, and the layout is simple yet effective. I mean, everything is there. You don't have to. There's no artistic flourishes that make things unreadable or unseeable. It's all there. My only complaint about your books, and I've told you this before, and you're going to solve the problem, is that I hate when I'm in HighFell and it refers me back to a monster and Barrowmaze. I'm like, damn it.
Yeah, I know.
I'm going to have to make something up because that book's at home. I don't have the book with me right now, or I got to go pull it up on my computer, you know, pull it up. That's and you're going to solve that with the monster book. So that'll be something I don't have to worry about anymore either.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm aware. But the thing is, when you're building one of these books, what I do is I'm ballparking, you know, how many pages will the introduction be? How many words? The main body, how many pages? How many words? The monster section, how many pages? How many words? And then you start. I have been very reluctant to get into the 300 range. I've been in like the 260, 285 range. This one is 330 pages, and that's with a trim monster section. So I just needed to address the monster book, and I think it'll look really cool at the end of the day, and be a nice sort of accessory. And I'm doing it because people asked, and it makes sense. So we'll do it and get it out of the way.
Great.
And also, in a way, it's true to history, right? When we had AD&D, we got the Monster Manual first, right? Before we even had the Player's Handbook or the D&D. So before we actually get the official Gillespie rule set, we will actually have the Monster Manual for the Gillespie rule set. I like that. By the way, Gary Oliver has a question. I know this might be a taboo question, Gary. I have no idea if it is or not. We'll find out in a second. But are these books ever available in searchable PDF format for iPads, etc.?
Well, do you mean indexed or do you mean searchable? Because you can search any PDF for keywords and find what you need.
I don't know. We'll find out when Gary responds.
Just to jump in there as well. So I did the 10th anniversary monochrome cover of Barrowmaze Complete. And it went over very well, and people were asking me for if I would do the other books in a monochrome. So that's also in the works.
Interesting.
So I'm doing an orange monochrome for Forbidden Caverns, of course, a blue for HighFell. So those are I just got the front and back cover art for those. So those will be laid out, and all my books are now in the 70-pound paper with the better print resolution. So when those monochromes go live, they'll already be in the 70-pound variety as well. In addition, Dwarrowdeep will also be done, ready to go in the bigger page, the thicker page, paper quality, and the print quality as well. So those will all be squared away.
Yes, Gary, they are available in PDF. You can go to drive-through. They are there, and I believe this is also print on demand. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that I noticed that when drive-through approached me about upgrading the paper and print quality, I was very excited, and I had the old one and the new one. I was going page for page with each of those books to make sure it's on point, and I noticed a big difference and was very pleased.
I know the high quality. I know there's a number of publishers that do their black and white titles on a higher quality color paper because the paper is just that much better, even for black and white art. There is something that just crosses over. I still remember some of the earlier drive-through stuff that was POD. If it wasn't on cheaper paper to bleed through, would be I'll say annoying at times. But I haven't had that issue with some of the more recent stuff. The higher end paper looks as well as something that's published by an elite printer. So without the little written bookmark, but we can't have everything.
Yeah, I mean the monochromes are a guilty pleasure for me. I don't like some people like them, some people don't. Some people like digest sized books. I don't personally because I want the bigger font size. So I'm not a digest size fan, but I appreciate that some people are. And some people like monochromes, some people don't. I adore the monochromes. I think they're super cool. And so it's a guilty pleasure for me.
What are you calling your rule set?
I have a working title, which I'm not going to share right now. But the working title may evolve. So I'll keep wordsmithing it. What I do with all my mega dungeons, those get wordsmithed. They get iterated over and over and over until I'm happy with them. And so yeah, that's sort of where that's at.
Gary, he loves real books, but sometimes PDFs are easier to find stuff in.
Sure.
I'm going to take you one step further. If I am running something, if I'm going to read Greg stuff to read it and get prepped to run it, I want the book. I want to flip in my.
I use the books at the table too. Yeah.
But at the table, because I am one of those assholes that writes on the actual adventure and does the hit point. When you're killing it, it's in the original. I will print out the area that I expect my party to be in and maybe a little bit beyond. So I don't have a full book in front of me. I have what I need for that night and maybe the next night. And that way, if I make notes, and I can make notes right in the encounter areas, and I can throw it out when done or put it in my gaming folder. I don't destroy the originals like I did back in my college days. At least I wrote in pencil. But I'd rather just print it out now for the table. It's a lot easier than having a big book of stuff that you're not going to look at 95% when you're at the table.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just me. I tried having it on my second screen as a PDF, but I prefer the paper.
Yeah, I mean, you need the mechanical stuff that's making the adventure happen at the table, right? So your substantive content, your monsters, spells, stuff like that, and your maps. Once you've read the introductory stuff and you communicated whatever you need to communicate to players, you don't necessarily need that once you're in game.
This is not product placement, folks, but I don't have any warrant tonight.
I'll tell you one thing that I also know. If you're on the fence about buying any of Greg's products, which you shouldn't be, the replayability of these is immense. And I'll give you an example. My group has been through about 30 sessions of HighFell, and they're reached a point where they're kind of a stopping point, so to speak. And last time we played a couple weeks ago, they started over with first level characters. The great thing is Greg included so many encounter locations in HighFell, and he does this in all the adventures also, that they can run through the whole HighFell again without necessarily coming across any of the dungeons they already went through or any of the encounter areas outside of the dungeon. And I think that's a really good selling point of all his adventures. Barrowmaze is this. I mean, it's hard for me to believe a group would map the entirety of Barrowmaze plus all the barrows. Likewise, Forgotten Caverns of Archaia. There's so many encounter areas there. Is this something you do on purpose? I mean, or is you just like to throw everything in the kitchen sink in there? Because I just find it hard to believe a party would go through every single encounter area in all these adventures. There's still a lot of meat on those bones.
Oh, sure. I'm a very firm believer in some low-hanging fruit. And I also like replayability. So with Barrowmaze, you've got your crypt generator, and people just so they're playing a game and maybe they see something in Barrowmaze they're inspired by. They can poach the crypt generator and they can throw a couple barrow mounds in their own home game or in a wilderness hex map or whatever. And it's very easy to do. It can be diced up like a one-page dungeon. Then in Forbidden Caverns, you don't want to run Forbidden Caverns, but you like the Kobold layer. Well, boom, you can put the Kobold layer in your thing, or the Orc layer or whatever. HighFell, you don't want to play HighFell, you've got the Mage Towers. You can put a Mage Tower in your Wilderness Hex map, and boom, there you go. Dwarrowdeep will be similar with some of the secondary encounter areas. So yes, it's purposeful. And yes, I'm trying to give DM some agency as well. So we're limited in time. We're adults. We've got families and work and so on. But you can put a little bit in there that gives people some ownership and they can put their spin on it too.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Reusable gaming material is always so much nicer than stuff that's one and done. The vast majority of our stuff is one and done, right? When you look at your classic TSR stuff, there was very little replayability in it because there was very little that was included that was meant to be used beyond that one setting of adventures or whatever.
Well, the whole interesting thing about if you look at TSRs, so the history of TSR, if you look at their adventures, number one, almost all of them, the early ones were tournament adventures that were turned into campaign adventures. So yeah, those aren't meant to be actually replayability in those. And then number two, there a lot of the early stuff, the Giant series, T series, U series, they were campaign adventures. And so a campaign adventure, you're kind of meant to find everything the first time. You're not going to go back there for a company, for a gaming style. For instance, mega dungeons. We all look at mega dungeons as a thing, but there weren't any mega dungeons. The first published mega dungeon for TSR was Undermountain in 1992 or 1992. So that they went a full, 20-something years before they published Mega Dungeon. Well, likewise with Sandbox. Sandbox is kind of a staple now of what we consider old school D&D, yet there really were no sandboxes. TSR didn't really publish a sandbox. I mean, that wasn't something they did. Everything was very structured the way they published it. There wasn't a lot of meat left on those bones. Like you said, once you went through, I6 or Baltron's Beacon or whatever, you're through. That's it. You don't go back. You move on to the next adventure. And that's one of the things I think the OSR got right was that, hey, here's an area. And by the way, you can use this a lot. You can use this over and over and over again because you're not going to explore everything here. And that's about mega dungeons too. Mega dungeons, you're probably not going to map out an entire mega dungeon.
No, first of all, I adore Baltron's Beacon. That was a nice. I love that adventure. It's just perfect. And when I was thinking about the Barrowmore for Barrowmaze, you could drop Baltron's Beacon right in there, and it would fit. It would be spot on. So I love that. The other thing too, you mentioned Undermountain, and I've spoken about this in the past. Barrowmaze was definitely a reflection of what I did not like about published mega dungeons. They were just maps and basically tables, and there's nothing really holding it together. You have to have something to hold it together now, but when you're dealing with an arc that's starting in early levels and could finish in later levels, you do have to have a little bit of flexibility in how it ultimately plays out. So you have to provide that. And you don't want to be, I want to be the opposite of railroady, but at the same time, it has to be ready to go because people are busy, they have minimal prep time, and you have to help people out. So, I definitely, some things about Undermountain I like, but most of it I didn't, and it was Barrowmaze was a response to that.
Yeah, I didn't like Undermountain. I had it, and I had great thoughts about it, and then I actually tried to run it. And I realized that there was nothing in it within the first 2 sessions that excited my party. There were no hooks that my party was like, oh, I'll latch onto this and keep on moving. It was like, oh, so this is kind of like when we were all 13 and you would just fill in a graph.
I'm going to be a dissenting voice here. I loved Undermountain. I ran a 2.5-year campaign in Undermountain because it allowed you to develop so many spots, and I could just stick all my little, the complaints I always heard about Undermountain was, well, it's this giant maps and they've only got a few encounter areas here and there. I love that kind of shit. I like to take a map and throw my own stuff in there, and
shadow disagrees.
But I mean, I can understand why people wouldn't like it. Like, if you want there's tons of undeveloped areas in Undermountain, and from what I've heard, people talking to Ed Greenwood, he actually didn't want that. That's what kind of TSR kind of by fiat said, no, we're not going to fill in all this areas, because apparently in Ed Dungeon he had a lot of that filled in, and they said, no, we don't need it all filled in.
Actually, some of the Undermountain 32-page adventures, I liked those more than I did the box set, because they had a little bit more focus to it, and they did have some interesting stuff in there. So if I was going to try to find the silver lining, I would say I like the 32 pagers more so than the box set.
I always thought, I still don't think it's interesting though, because people talk about the basic D&D idea, Castle Greyhawk. It's a mega dungeon, right? It's this giant mega. El Raja K, Rob Kuntz's dungeon. It's a mega dungeon. Blackmore, it's a mega dungeon. Yet we never really. That's not something that any of the companies ever really did. They're like, mega dungeon is kind of the history of our product, but we're really not going to do any mega dungeons. It's always seemed weird to me that Undermountain was really the first published mega dungeon, and it didn't come around to the hobby was 20 years old, and that was just because that's not what they focused on. They focused on I don't know if they were all, you call them all railroad. Some of them are railroads, some aren't, but very structured adventures to where here's A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, leads to E.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question that you have there, Eric.
Dandelion Games, Greg, having done the mega dungeon thing a bit, how does a writer pace themselves for that sort of endeavor? On the outset, how far away do you project the publishing to be from the day you start formally? Man.
So there is no pacing yourself. You do the project until you're done. And I always like the adage, how do you eat a whale? You do it one bite at a time. So when you think about a mega dungeon project like these, it can be intimidating, and it is intimidating, but I always bite off just as much as I can chew. And that I do think pie in the sky and work backwards. So how do you pace yourself? You don't. You acknowledge the project is going to be exhaustive. You are going to burn yourself out doing it. You're going to give up a year or two of your life. And I mean that. It takes early mornings and late days to get that kind of thing done. And it's not just the writing, it's the organization, it's the playing, it's the copy editing, and it's the map copy editing, and the table editing, and so on. And if you assume 3% human error in 140,000 words, that's a lot of errors. And what I try to do is I try to be under 1%. And that just means you have to iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate over and over and over. And you have to do it until the last dog is hung. So pardon the expression, but you right until, a couple weeks before publication, you are iterating. And that's just how it works. And the other part too is, when you run a Kickstarter or you do something like that, and a lot of people show their trust in you, you have to be okay with that burden sitting on your shoulders for a year or two. And there are people who can handle that, and there are people who can't. And we all know about wayward Kickstarters.
Yeah.
So if you know how to do that, so I did a master's thesis, I did a PhD dissertation. I know what that feels like, and I have to wear a certain cap when I'm engaging in a long-term project like that. And I have a single-minded determination to see the project done to the absolute best of my ability. And that's what it takes. And there's no pacing yourself. You will burn yourself out. Because you're a creative type, you will go through self-doubt. And you have to acknowledge that self-doubt is a very healthy part of your creative process. You have to sit back and you have to say, this day's work I just did, it's crap. And I don't like it. And these are the reasons why I don't like it. And it has to be redone tomorrow. And that's just part of it. You can't cheat the process. And, I've learned a lot. I played competitive football for a long time. And you'll know this from Mike, having listened to Jason Garrett, but he was process oriented. You have to make the process good on a Monday in order to have a good Tuesday. And you have to have 2 good days to have a good third day. And you have to have a good fourth day to, following up 3 good days. And if you commit to that process, the product will always be there at the end. What you're hoping to get. That's what I mean by product. What you're hoping to get will be there. And that's excellent context for how do you wrap your mind around a project that's 140,000 words and maps, and then it's not just that, it's project management. So you have to recruit new artists pretty well on every project. Some, you hope to carry over. And others, then you have to manage some personalities at times. And sometimes you have to communicate to an artist that, this is good, but it could be better. Here's where it could be better. And some of my dissertation was art appraisal. So I know what I want. And I've studied the early history of the hobby to know what I want. And if an artist can work with me in that regard, we're going to do something awesome together. And if they can't, then I'll have to move on. But I have a very clear idea in my mind of what I want, and both in the text and in the art.
Well, you need it, because that's how you get your full projects. If you don't having done smaller projects, going into it not knowing what you want really is a way to hamper yourself. Dandelion Games with T1 to 4 be a mega dungeon. Now, Mike says no. I used
No.
to say yes. You know what? Here,
No.
I'm going to redefine what I would have said. A mega dungeon is a dungeon that you don't need to complete everything in the dungeon to get the full experience of the dungeon.
Okay, I can understand. I can see where you're coming from.
T1 to 4, you got to go through almost every square inch of T1 to 4 to accomplish your goal. Okay, to get to the very end. It isn't like you can bypass stuff. It is kind of like you don't realize it's a railroad until you look back and remember, yeah, I was probably playing a railroad. So it could be a proto mega dungeon. It was TSR's experiment in how big a dungeon can we put out, and would it sell? But a mega dungeon, something that Greg does, you go through Barrowmaze, you can explore 30, 40, 50, 60% of what Greg put out there and still be doing that 2 years later, still exploring it, still having your party in its 7th iteration because of a couple of TPKs. But it still is explorable, right? It doesn't necessarily have an end. T1 to 4 has an end. So again, I would call it was levels 1 through 8. I think we finished it in like levels 1 through 7 usually. I ran it like 3 times. It's something to me, in retrospect, I would say it's a campaign dungeon. It's meant to beginning and an end, when a mega dungeon doesn't have necessarily an end.
So. I see. I always look at mega dungeon to me as it's more of a mystical thing in terms of you want something legendary that's never been fully explored. It's a mystery. There's parts of it that are mysteries, absolute mysteries. There's parts of it that adventurers can discover that haven't been in. Nobody's been in hundreds of years, and I think that's where T1 through 4 fails the test because it's limited. I mean, a guy made a joke to me years and years ago. He said, did Frank Menzer have to use every square on his piece of hex paper? Because it's just
that's what we did back then. That was
with everything filled in, and that's, I mean,
paper was expensive.
I don't want to bang on Frank. I don't like to bang on Frank, but that's the difference between a true genius like Janelle Jaquays, who did something like Caverns of Thracia, which is like doesn't follow any kind of map or point. I mean, it's just all over the place. It's organic that a real dungeon would be. And somebody like Frank, who, like I said, I'm not going to bang on him, but he just took basically a square of hex paper and filled out every room in that square instead of saying, okay, and this goes off here, and this is over here, and this is lower level here. I think that's where you get from this is an inspired dungeon to this is, yeah, it's just another dungeon. And I think most mega dungeons, they really need to be inspired, and then it needs to be something that if a character looks at it, they're like, holy crap, we are not going to ever finish this. We're going to be lucky if we live through it even. I mean, right. It's immense. This thing the immensity is blowing my mind. It's so giant. It's like if you a post-apocalyptic game and you walk into New York City, you should be sitting there, oh shit, we're in New York. We're not going to be able to explore New York City. I mean, it's beyond our means to explore New York City. So that person, everybody does their own version. That's my personal idea of a mega dungeon. It should be something that the immensity overwhelms the characters, and they realize we don't. But the other thing is, like you're saying, you don't have to explore every single square foot of a mega dungeon. You shouldn't have to. You should get the pleasure of just doing what you're doing, and not say like, oh, because we didn't go in this room, this is not going to happen the right way. No, that's not what a mega dungeon is. A mega dungeon is like giant. It's a giant warehouse at the end of Indiana Jones. I mean, it's so big that it's so immense you're never going to explore it. So, I don't think now. I think of all Greg's dungeons, I mean, probably Barrowmaze is the most traditional in that. I think a determined party could map it all out. I mean, it would be a beat down, but you could map it all. You could do that, but I think the two that I mentioned, HighFell and Archaia, because there's so many different location-based things. I think that'd be a tough one. I just don't foresee a party doing that and saying, "Hey, we're going to hit every location here."
Well, pardon me. For me, I think this is sort of like sort of flighty notion that their mega dungeon's not completable, and I disagree with that. It should be reasonably completable. So, like, if you're going to start something that you can never finish, I think that that sort of is a creative buzz. It's an inspirational letdown. So I would say, like, if you're playing your characters through 7th through 10th level from level 1, it should be completable at that stage. And so that's what I sort of shoot for. And like the Temple of Elemental Evil, I did finish that when I was a young teenager with a really bad named character, but I'll hand wave that part of it. But it was completable. And so, what I've done, if folks don't know, is to a degree I'm trying to redefine the mega dungeon. That a mega dungeon can be presented in different ways. So you can have a sprawl like Barrowmaze instead of overlapping levels. You could take a cool initial idea like Caves of Chaos, which was amazing and wonderful when we were 12, but now we have a group of veteran gamers who've read everything and played all this stuff, and they're looking for different types of intellectual challenges. And so writing for that group of people who are on point and they've played these other modules and games, they've experienced them, and they want a new challenge, and yet something that's grounded in the history of the hobby. And then with HighFell, I've always been fascinated with the idea of a floating mega dungeon going all the way back to Dragons of Desolation in the Dragonlance group of modules. So I was always inspired by that and loved playing that adventure back in the day. And I wanted to do that with a mega dungeon sort of approach. And then Dwarrowdeep is, it's, as I said at the outset, I'm really excited about dwarves and playing dwarves and what that means and how I could make it more interesting and provide some depth, like the traditional notion of the dwarven stone sense. The dwarves have certain abilities when they're underground. I've sort of broadened and expanded that a bit to give players a little bit more of an interesting experience. And it's something that they have to sort of figure out over time rather than being dumped in their lap as a player character with knowledge before they even play the game. So it's something they have to sort of experience.
All right, so here,
well, you're wrong about mega dungeons, Greg, but I'll let you.
No, here I'm gonna make a different argument than that.
But
Mike just gave you the Jedi mind trick. This is not the mega dungeon you're looking for.
Right here, a mega dungeon, you can finish it. You can't necessarily complete it. And by that I mean you can get to the end, the satisfying end. You can accomplish your goal.
I'll give you that.
But a mega dungeon, my group going through it, and Mike's group going through it, and Greg's group going through it, I'm probably not going to have the same experiences because they're all going to branch off in different directions to get to that same goal. If you don't have those branches, and that's where T1 to 4, in my opinion, under strict definition, fails all right away, you're almost forced to go through every bit of that dungeon. Everybody had the same play experience in the end. Everybody went through T1 to 4 is going to have some of the same memories because you can only go the same areas. But in a mega dungeon, such as, especially, I'm going to go back to Barrowmaze because the way Barrowmaze is so spread out, you can finish it. You can accomplish your goal, but you're not going to necessarily complete everything that's available. And that's good because it means that it's a unique experience to your group as opposed to the unique experience of Mike's group.
Mm-hmm. And that happens not only in a big picture sense, but I do that in a smaller sense too. So if you notice in Barrowmaze and in other mega dungeons, I'll present a hidden treasure room, but there's usually a better hidden treasure room off that one or close to that one. So it depends. I like to, one of the things I think is very old school is map study. Very specific, detailed mapping should be rewarded. And so if you're looking at a map in between gaming sessions and you say, well, geez, there's sort of a dead space over here. That's probably something that you should go check out. And good, I've had a really good mapper in my past home games, and he would do that, and he'd hand draw the map between sessions, and then at the start of each session he's like, I think we need to sort of go over here. And so I like to reward that kind of careful play, that careful map study. So I think, and that's something that I think some people just hand wave, and I'm not hand waving it. It's part of the game.
You know, and that, in a way, that's going to actually play differently than possibly if you are playing on a VTT, because you're often doing fog of war, so those empty areas show up right away. It's not necessarily, there's no bad mapping in the VTT because you're revealing stuff. You take that aspect out of it. I remember in my gaming groups, we had one good skilled mapper. That was me. And since I ran most of the game sessions when we played D&D, my players couldn't map for shit. And half the time, it was like, all right, holy fuck, just give me the paper, and I'm mapping it out. So I'm not going through the insanity of my players having absolutely no clue where the fuck they are. Doesn't happen with a VTT, but there is something about that map skill as an actual player skill that I think we've a lot of times gone away from.
I totally agree.
You know,
I agree too, because I don't let my players map because it's to me. I remember Rob Kuntz was very big on old school D&D, and that you know the players map, and he would spend, and he did. He came to the convention, ran games. He'd spend 3 hours running the characters in circles because they map bad, and I know that's a more realistic approach, but it's not a very fun approach, and especially not if you're running a convention game where people have limited amount of time. And there was a lot of frustration for the players in his games because he was like, no, y'all are drawing the dungeon. You drew it bad and you're running in circles now. I'm not going to help you. And so they wouldn't have an encounter for 3 hours and walk in circles. Well, that's not the kind of game I would like to run. And I actually wish Rob hadn't run that kind of game either. But I understand that. It's just that I like to get to the meat of the story. And to me, the meat is the encounters, you know, whether they be fighting encounters or other encounters. I think that's the meat of what we like about D&D. And so I like to blow past a lot of the hand wave, a lot of the stuff that gets you there. And I'll give you another example too. Is one of the really interesting things about HighFell is how you get back and forth from HighFell. And you've given a bunch of methods in there. There's a lot of methods to get there. There's these flying creatures called biacs that you can tame and fly up there. There's a way to get some seeds that grow these giant vines. You can climb up the vine and get their kind of Jack of the Beanstalk. Mm-hmm. There's these things called henge gates, which are pretty cool, where you can teleport there. The point we're at right now is they've been using biacs to fly back and forth the last.
Yeah, even like a biac depot, a ranch or something.
Yes, they've monetized biacs. They grabbed a bunch of biacs and said, "Can we breed the biacs?" I'm like, I guess. And so they started their own biac breeding company. They've been selling biacs. So, which I love when players do stuff like that. That's great because that's not covered anywhere in the rules at all. You know,
no, that's players' story. They'll burn the village down. They'll create a biac.
They'll do something. So, but at this point, we kind of hand wave getting to HighFell. I know that's part of the great part about it is you shouldn't hand wave that. It should always be a struggle just to get to the dungeon. But the point now, like I said, we're on about our 30th session. We kind of hand wave that. Okay, you're there. You're going to fly the biac. You're up. Okay, you're on HighFell. Where do you want to go? Yeah. And so sometimes DMs get lazy. We just want to get to I don't want to spend 3 hours getting to HighFell. You're on HighFell. You're there, and so what's going to happen now? So
yeah, I get it. You know what? Just bring it back to North Texas. The most profound experience I had playing Barrowmaze was the last time I was at North Texas before COVID, and I ran a Barrowmaze game, and there were about 6 or 8 players. And I said, oh, okay, well, you know, tell me a little bit about yourself and, you know, how much experience you have sort of playing the game and that sort of thing, just to get a sense of sort of where people are at before we started. And one person had never played a role-playing game before. And they're playing my game is their introduction to role-playing games. And it just sort of like hit me. It's because you just sort of take it for granted that, you know, everyone has, you know, played whatever biacs or AD&D or second edition, and I'm like, wow, like, well, number one, I better not kill that person off right away, and number two, I got to be on point here. Like, I have to make this a great experience, because this is, if this person doesn't have a good experience, they might not ever pick it up again. And it really hit me when I was at North Texas last.
I know that when I'm in North Texas, I usually run a B1 game. And I have had many of those experiences, Eric, or Greg, because B1's obviously it's an introductory adventure. And so I've had that happen many times where it's like, hey, I've actually, well, not only they never played B1, which I think is weird because I've played it like 100 times now. Well, I've never done B1, or I've never, done this. But yeah, every once in a while you get one of those players like, hey, I've never actually played role-playing games before. And you're like, pressure, because I got to make this, I got to be at the top of my game. But I think, as DMs, we need to always approach, especially when you do a con game, maybe not as much obviously with your regular players, but when you're doing a convention game, it's always good to assume there's one or two people there that have never played before. And so you can't just half-ass it. I mean, you've got to give it your all every time. And I always try to do that when I'm running B1 at a convention, is always try to make, even though I've run it, God, probably 100 times. And, but every time's different, every time's a little different. And that's what's great about, those kind of adventures. You never know when you're going to have one of those classic stories that you tell over and over again. Is this going to be the group that does something just so ridiculous that, you're going to be telling that story over and over again? Or are they going to have something really heroic happen? Because, you always have that one group where the party's about to die and you got one guy left standing and he's fighting the carrion crawler. And if he doesn't make a saving throw, he's down. The whole party's down. And everybody's just sitting there watching the dice like, oh my God, 20, you hit him. Oh my God, he's dead. Oh, thank God. Oh, and so you always want to have one of those type of moments. And so, yeah, it's always good to assume that, maybe not everybody here is and I think that's a good idea to go around the table and kind of talk to everybody, because then you find those people. And it's not cheating for a DM. Like you said, you don't want to kill that guy right off the bat because you want him to have a great experience. Now, if you're Rob Kuntz, you'd kill him right off the bat because that's what Rob Kuntz used to do.
Well, if anything actually happened, if it wasn't just that.
He'd live in absolute realism and dungeoning. It doesn't. I don't care who you are, whatever. You're going to die, or you're going to wander around El Roger Cave for 3 hours, not going to counter anything. Not my problem. That's your problem.
Yeah, I mean, if you're sitting around and everyone's played before, it's fair game. But there's a bigger picture going on. If somebody sits down in your game and they're like, "I've never played a role-playing game before," so now you gotta. This is a bigger picture. You want this person to join the hobby. You want them to come back to North Texas, and so on and so forth. So yeah, you gotta think.
One of the coolest things that ever happened. I ran many years ago. This is in the 80s. I ran Mass Seniority Depth, that what people consider the premier ever Call of Cthulhu campaign. And so we had two guys in our group. One guy had never played Call of Cthulhu, which, he played the role-playing games, but his friend had never played role-playing games ever. And so I'm describing the whole concept of, kind of what Call of Cthulhu is for somebody that doesn't know who Lovecraft is, doesn't understand this. And he basically said, oh, it's the 20s. Can I be Indiana Jones? There you go. And so that was his touchstone point. Yes, you could be Indiana Jones in this game. So He took skill in whip. He took skill on gun. I mean, so he basically made his character Indiana Jones. He had a blast. He absolutely loved it, even though he had never played a role-playing game. And he and his friend, they showed up for every session. We finished the entire campaign. And the great thing was, years later at a convention, I saw him playing a role-playing game. And so he had taken that, hey, I've never actually played, any role-playing game, to like, he must have liked role-playing games. So he actually went to a convention at some point and started playing. So I felt really good about, hopefully that was the great experience he had playing Call of Cthulhu with my group, that, he decided that, hey, this is actually pretty fun and I can do this. But and we all know there's some DMs that are dicks. Right. And they would have been, oh yeah, you can be Indiana Jones. And then the first encounter, Cthulhu pops up and they lose all their sanity. And you're insane. You're going insane.
You hang yourself with your own whip.
Yeah, exactly. You shoot yourself in the head because there's snakes and you're scared of snakes, so yeah, sure. But yeah,
I see Rocky in the chat. I just want to give a massive shout out to Rocky. So he's doing the layout for Dwarrowdeep. He is nailing it. He's crushing it. He's putting up with my micromanagement, and I'm very thankful for Rocky. He's done a tremendous job. I just want to heap praise on him. He's amazing.
Boy, it sounds like I need to hire this Rocky guy, I guess.
You definitely do.
Yes.
Yeah, he's crushing it, and he's
Yeah.
done such a great job.
He did the layout for HighFell too, right?
Yes, he did, and
Yeah,
I was very happy that Rocky puts up with me, and we're doing great work together, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with everyone down the road.
I appreciate my old age. Very well, easily laid out. I mean, yeah, I'll read something that Wenger Satanis wrote, but it's, you know, I have to be in the mood because it's weird. It's all kinds of crazy. I mean, there's a lot of guys. I mean, anything that, unfortunately, if a Lamentations of Flame Princess is illustrated by Scrap Princess, I have to fight through the god awful, terrible art. I mean, so yes, I appreciate when something's just very cleanly and clearly laid out, and I don't have to squint or, you know, flip through 8 pages to look for something. So yeah, Rocky does a great job.
My RPG reading these days, swear to God.
You know, that one of the hardest things, speaking of layout, one of the hardest things to do if you're thinking about doing more than one is you need to establish your prototype for the delivery before the first one is done. So you need to, because if you're going to create a template that you're going to be using going forward, then it's going to make it easier in the long term for people to find your stuff. Like, so if they know, well, okay, this information is commonly in the introduction, then I'll go to the introduction. If it's, I know where the monster section is, I know where the new spells are, and so on and so forth. So that's something that that was done like with Barrowmaze Complete, and then another interesting point with the layout is, so like I have the same person with each mega dungeon who does the town map. Dave Needham. I have the same person who does the regional hex map, and the same person does the deity symbols. So there's some aesthetic consistency to each book. And if you just took the introductions and you put them back to back to back to back, you would see the commonalities. So those are some interesting things to think about. And you know, I just want to give a shout out to Steve Perrin here, because his the Unreal Farm adventure was central to thinking about how I wanted to lay out Barrowmaze Complete, and how much I appreciate him.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve was a great loss. Steve was a nice guy. He loved coming to North Texas. It really sucks. He had to miss it last year, and of course he passed away a couple months after missing it, which really sucks because he really wanted to come to North Texas last year. But yeah, he was a great guy. Great.
Yeah, I dedicated Dwarrowdeep to him.
Oh, good deal. That's good. He was yeah, it was, you know, you sit down with him and then you start realizing, you start checking off in your brain all his bullet points. You're like, holy shit, this he's done some shit. I mean, he's been in the industry for a long time. He's done about a little bit of everything. He had some great stories too. You know, he's worked with about everybody. I mean, he knew everybody there. It's really, I know it sounds dumb, but he was taken too early. It really was, because I mean, he still had a lot to give the community. So
Dandelion Games has a question. What do you think is better? Is it better for Dungeon Complex to have a realistic abundance of mundane things, staterooms, privies, food stores, etc., or turn a blind eye to realism to make sure encounter spaces are more diverse? I'm going to throw my comment out there real quick before we let real game designers like Greg mention it, but I'm going to say just enough to make it feel real. Nobody wants a real dungeon. Throw in the occasional privy. Hey, it'll stick out in your player's mind. But if everything is supposed to be realistic, it suddenly is no longer realistic.
I think only two published adventures by TSR ever had privies, and they were L2, the Assassin's Knot, and it becomes a plot point, and Undermountain. Undermountain had privies, which becomes a plot point because you could actually go in the privies at one point and discover stuff. But I don't think any TSR dungeon, old school at least, had privies at all. I mean, there wasn't a dungeon dump room in the G series, which would have been,
it has to be giant size. I mean, you could fall into
gross. Okay, I'm gonna dig around in the dungeon privy to look for some gold. You go for it, brother.
Yeah, but it's kind of like everything in old school D&D is risk reward, right? So you could read that scroll, but it could be cursed. You could search the privy, but you might get diseased, or there might be something cool in there. So you have to have that risk reward stuff, and I love that about the old school.
Yeah, but you don't have to. You don't have to actually say, okay, there's 100 people in this castle. I need 18 privies. I mean, that's going a little too far with, with realistic versus fantasy.
Yeah, Eric's right. Just enough to communicate that they're there, but you don't need to overdo.
Yeah, it should. It's like spice. Too much is going to definitely be too much. If it's not enough, your players will tell you. And all right, well, look at that. There's a privy behind that door. Didn't expect that. If they say there's not enough privies, you can throw one in. But if you have privies that are behind every door, they'd be like, oh, shit. No, I don't need to use the bathroom. Can we just move on? Again,
I used to have a ball with my players because I would give them just enough gold found in a room full of rat shit that they'd feel like they had to search the rat shit. And of course, I'd roll for disease because they're digging around in freaking rat shit. And one of the most famous quotes of any game I ran, my old school players still recite it, is they had this guy who was an NPC who I loved because he would have all kinds of Confucius fortune cookie sayings after adventures, and one of his most famous sayings was man who dig around in rat shit for copper piece deserves disease he catches. Because that's what my brother would always do is dig. I'm going to dig around here because there's got to be something in here. So yeah, half an hour later, you cover rat shit and roll for disease 5 times because you had open wounds the whole time you were digging through the rat.
Yeah, shit. Or there's rock grubs in there or something cool.
Oh yeah,
that was the infamous Dwarmount playtest that I ran. Where
that's right.
And the whole thing was the room had, what was it? And now I forget how many rats. Was it 8 rats? I know it was 2,000 coppers.
2,000 coppers and 8 rats, or whatever.
And there was no other way out of this room. And there were these rats. And right away, my players were like,
"Are they eating copper?"
First off, exactly 2,000 coppers. And they're like, "And why? How long? 8 rats in this room for how long?" Well, there must be a lot of shit.
There should be 80 rats. I mean, come on.
Oh, I go, there's a good half foot of rat dung, and then it became. I added in the rat dung. Again, you're a DM, right? You add in the little flashes when your players lead you to add in the little flashes sometimes, and then that became the infamous playtest that went around.
Greg, John Miller asked you about Under Illifar. I know you and I have talked about this before. What are your thoughts on Under Illifar? And because that was kind of an interesting module. It wasn't one of the things that was interesting about it. Wasn't like a lot of things TSR had put out up until then. It was very different in a lot of ways.
Yeah, so I liked how it sort of had the gazetteer overview information. It had the layout of the town. It had the layout of the personalities. And so you had everything you sort of needed for inspiration, but not enough to curb your creativity. And then I liked how how the personalities, the faces of the personalities were presented. And I believe if I recall our conversation correctly, that Steve said that his wife had done some of the illustrations. And then I had the discussion with him right before he passed. We were talking about the different factions, and I was of the opinion the dwarves are going to get slaughtered. Like I just don't see how it's not going to happen. And he had that discussion with other people as well, that they said the dwarves are going to get slaughtered. But then I think they did a playtest battle, and the dwarves kept winning. So that was sort of an interesting discussion as well. So there are things I think that if he had the space, he could have taken that dungeon and made it broader and more expansive and more interesting. But they're working with the 32 pagers. And then the other question I had was, why, given it's sort of a dwarven themed adventure, why do we have an illustration with the gargoyle sort of on a citadel top? And he said that he was given that image and that's what they were going with, so he had to include a gargoyle in the adventure.
Well, if you want to hear about TSR's art policy, just talk to R.A. Salvador and how the covers absolutely butchered Drizzt on, like the first 5 or 6 books. He had a lot to say about that years later. That he's kind of like, yeah, Drizzt is this. And if you look at some of the covers, they're absolutely hideous, because Drizzt looks like he's 800 years old on the cover. Yeah. It's just like, yeah, that's what I was given. I mean, that's the cover they slapped on the book. It wasn't until he got more powerful and was making a lot of money, he actually got to start doing a cover approval. Like, yeah, no, that cover's not going to work. I need a cover where Drizzt looks like an actual drow elf and not a 800-year-old, lich or whatever.
Yeah, so that's one of the, and it's one of the, I think it was the first Forgotten Realms module under Ilfar, and I'm willing to stand corrected there, but I believe it was.
It was actually, it's the first edition module too. If anybody wants it's first edition, because a lot of people forget, Forgotten Realms came out. Forgotten Realms was first edition, the gray box.
Yeah, and
it was actually first edition to the first few supplements. I want to say FR 1, 2, 3, 4 were all first edition. Waterdeep and Moonshade, whatever. So a lot of people forget there's a big part of Forgotten Realms history is actually written in first edition.
I played in a game with Ed Greenwood in Toronto years ago, and I played he had pre-generated characters. It was second edition, and I was given a cleric, and of course Ed did the gray box and most of the other Forgotten Realms stuff, or the early Forgotten Realms stuff. So I went to turn undead, and he said to me, okay, well, go ahead. So he wanted me to do some sort of creative flair to role play it. So I stood up and very firmly presented my holy symbol, and I said, by the power of Torm, I banish you unholy abominations. And I did it, in a very dramatic way. He didn't even roll. He's like, your holy symbol glows with the power of your deity, and they flee with zombies or whatever they were. And I was like, nailed it with that Greenwood.
See, if you've been playing my game, everybody would like, sit down. This is not acting 101. Yes. So yes, it does help when you do that at a convention with the creator. That helps quite a bit. So I remember that if I play Barrowmaze with you sometime, I'm going to overact. I'm going to absolutely overact, Greg.
Absolutely. Yeah. Method act. I mean, in my history of role-playing games class, when I run people through character generation and one-page dungeon generation, then we actually play, I've had a few method actors who are film majors, and they are a tremendous group to play. Once they get in character and they stay in character, it's a lot of fun. They're fun to play with.
I always had this, I know this sounds sexist, but I've honestly I think women role play better than men. And I think a lot of that's because, there's probably different reasons for that, but I think a lot of it is because most women don't have the kind of history and role playing that men do. We don't. They when I was a kid, they didn't play. A lot of women didn't play D&D. It wasn't until later on we actually met women that played. So I think they have less expectation about what they should do versus like, hey, this sounds cool. I'm going to actually role play this character. But in my campaign, or my history of playing since '78, the best role players I've done have always been women, and a lot of them are art majors too. They're into film. They're film majors or acting majors. So I think there's truth to that.
Yeah, I think. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to add that all it takes is one method actor at a table, and it gives permission for everybody else to come over.
That's a big part of it. Yeah, I agree.
I was also going to say that I think in general, and it's obviously if you go to specifics, it breaks down, but in general, I think men, especially gamer men, are more into the critical thinking. We're trying to think tactics. We're wargaming it, even if we didn't start from the wargaming background.
Right.
When Rach got introduced to gaming, aside from my one time running her through a TNT adventure, Tunnels and Trolls, her first GM was at North Texas. And it was Tim Schneider, and he was running Time Master. And why was her first RPG Time Master? Because I figured besides Tim running the game and me, who owned the game back in the day, most people at that game were not going to be fluent in the rules, let alone know them. So she wouldn't have to worry about being, I don't know the rules and I got to learn how to role play, and which was great. All the rules were kind of like, off the table. Tim took care of the rules, told you what you needed to roll, and asked you what you were doing. And within half an hour, my wife was, doing wrestling holds on a four-armed alien creature. And I was like, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I pound his head into the wall." I was like, I married this woman? But she wasn't worrying about the rules. She was able to just embrace the whole idea of little role playing, being part of the role. Again, as male gamers, especially ones that we grew up playing in the early '80s, even if you didn't come from wargaming, you wind up buying war games because that was just a culture back then. And I think that's something that's wired into us where, with women, they're not thinking necessarily the tactics. They think
they have different expectations. I absolutely agree with you on that. Somebody's needs to write a paper or a book about that, because I really think there is a connection there, and because I think the expectations that, like when I was a kid, were playing or younger, the expectations were you weren't going to overact and be silly because, like you said, it was a tactical. My players love nothing better than to say, okay, what's going on here? Okay, you're in a 90 by 90 room, and they would draw out the whole room on the thing, and okay, what's over here? And they want to know where the furniture was, and here's where the demon's standing, and here's this, that. I mean, they loved the tactical part. Yeah. I mean, that was their big, wow. And you're right. I think a lot of it just has to, I don't know, culturally, maybe it's men love war games and we love to set up war stuff, and women like more the actual role playing part. I remember one time we were doing a campaign, and it was actually Undermountain campaign, and one of the women we had playing with us was looking through the book. She says, "Oh, there's different royal families in Waterdeep. Can I be part of one?" I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." And so she chose the Roaring Horns. Well, it turns out the Roaring Horns, they like to party. Like that was their thing, is they had the biggest parties in Waterdeep. And her character was like a paladin. She goes, "I hate my family's partying. It just embarrasses me so much." And so we played off that. It was great. She did a great job with it, because every time she went back to visit her family, it was like, they were all drunk and there's parties, and the rest of the characters of the party like, "This is awesome, all the food." And she's like, "Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed." And it was just great, because none of the guys would ever thought of doing that. That would have been, absolutely something they wouldn't even have ever expected to do that in a million years. And then yet, somebody else thought, this would be really cool if I have a party or my family's diametrically opposed to what I stand for, and then we're going to role play it. And we had some good role playing out of that too.
Yeah, I mean, I love a good tactical game. I love a good intellectual game too. So I'm going to try to outsmart you. So put your collective brains together, see what you can come up with, and see if you're going. I'm going to try to be a couple steps ahead of you. Are you going to try to be a couple steps ahead of me in return? And then it's this dialogue back and forth. I'm going to try to set you up. Or are you going to allow yourself to be set up? If you're going to let me roll, you're in control until I get to roll dice. And when I roll dice, I'm going to try to kill you. So are you going to try to keep those dice out of my hand? And that's an interesting interplay back and forth between the person running the game and the players.
So you're because of COVID, unfortunately, you couldn't make it to North Texas for a few years, and I know you love to come down and visit us. So
I do.
We're going to make it this year, which is where I'm like super excited. This is awesome.
I have my hotel reservation. My flight I made yesterday. I am good to go.
As long as you're not under martial law in Canada, I think you'll be able to make it down. But
don't wind me up now. Don't wind me up.
Well, what are you planning on running when you get to North Texas?
I think I've so far I've put in a Forbidden Caverns session, and I put in a Dwarrowdeep session. So if you want to join in that, and I'll take requests too. If you have a game you want me to run, or a time you want me to run it, let me know, let Mike know, put it in the chat here, and I'll see if I can get it done.
Gary, I guess you never met Greg. Okay, Gary's been to all our conventions, but he's never met you somehow. You've
I don't know how that's running stuff than actually meeting
by Gary. But so that's going to be great. We're like I said, we're really excited to have you again this year. I'm
excited. As you know, I must have been a Texan in a former life, being a Dallas Cowboys fan, and I enjoy the culture there and the food so much. I always look forward to coming.
I love your your Dallas Cowboy fan story? Because I think that's so cool that a Canadian who didn't grow up anywhere near Texas and you didn't have any fans that liked the Cowboys even, right? You just were you were across the river from the Buffalo Bills and you just weren't a Buffalo Bills fan.
Oh no, I'm not. Definitely not a Buffalo Bills fan at all. And you know, Texas is refined in its football taste compared to Buffalo. Let's put it that way.
But they got Josh Allen now. Josh Allen's pretty damn good.
Strongest arm in the NFL for sure.
Yeah, he's a good. You know, I find myself rooting for him when they play teams like Kansas City because all my wife's family are Chiefs fans, and they're absolutely. I just can't. I can't deal with it anymore. They won one Super Bowl. I think they should win every year now. So I've been rooting for the Bills the last couple of years to eliminate the Chiefs. Which hasn't worked out for me, but so our obligatory Dallas Cowboy fan time while Eric stares at us.
Oh no, it's okay.
Not knowing what we're talking about.
Listen, you got Rachel's in the background. She's like, my family loves Dallas. As a New York fan, I will say that you know what, the Jets and the Giants together might have had as many wins as Dallas this year. I'm not sure.
Giants are going through a really bad period right now. Really bad. And the problem is, you took the coach that we threw out the door, Garrett, and for some reason you guys hired that bum, and so you kind of deserve everything you got the last couple of years. But speaking of coaches, we've talked about this a few times, Greg. So, what do you think about McCarthy versus Sean Payton? So Sean Payton was he just quit the Saints, and he was a very successful coach. Now, he's only won one Super Bowl, and McCarthy's only won one too. So they both only won one Super Bowl. But you think that Sean Payton should be hired as coach?
After, what was it, 8 years of Garrett and a couple years of McCarthy, I just want somebody that can manage game situations. Like, that's how low my bar is. Just have somebody who doesn't bugger the obvious. And I feel like Sean Payton's not going to bugger the obvious, and that can give you a chance. All things being equal, don't bugger your in-game situations. And I've seen enough from McCarthy, I've seen enough from Garrett. I just want a competent in-game manager at this stage.
You don't like McCarthy going for it at 4th and 5 on his own 40 or whatever he does when he does those weird, it makes no sense 4th down plays. I can understand going for it, 4th and 1 from maybe the 48. Okay, yeah, try that every once in a while, but those 4th down plays are just mind-boggling.
Yeah, they fall for other teams' attempts to get them to use a timeout. Dallas tries to do it and they just bugger it, and there's just been too many in-game mistakes for me from the McCarthy regime, and I'm ready for Sean Payton myself.
But here's the deal: is McCarthy's still under contract. Sean Payton says he's going to take a year off. So what do you think Jerry's going to do after this year? You think depending on what McCarthy does. Let's say McCarthy runs a 10-7 year out there. Like, okay, they make the playoffs, but no big deal. They're not going to really do anything.
Yeah, I think the pressure is only going to heat up as the season goes along. The speculation will be rampant by Thanksgiving, and it'll be all downhill from there. And I think it'll probably crater the season in the last half of it.
Yeah, unfortunately,
is it like a coach in his last year? Yeah, I think he signed a 3-year contract, didn't he?
Yeah, he signed 3 years. So he's in his last year, so that's going to be really interesting. He's going to have to win a playoff game McCarthy to continue on, which then that makes it so let's say McCarthy wins a couple playoff games. Oh, then you're like, well, do I get rid of him? You can't really fire a coach that's been that successful, can you? Even for Sean Payton.
It depends. If we see in-game management blunders as the season moves along, and the offense disappears like it did this year, and so you'll need to see it play out. But I've seen enough. I'm ready to move on.
I gotta tell you what, watching the playoff, there was really good playoffs. The playoffs were really good this year. The NFL playoffs, the Super Bowl was really good. I watched those teams, and I just don't think the Cowboys are ready to go to the next level yet. They're going to need a couple more good drafts because that they have way too many holes. Some of the teams I saw didn't really. I mean, the Bengals were. I mean, I thought they probably had the most holes of anybody, and I was really surprised they got the playoffs. But a good quarterback covers a lot of that, and Burrows is pretty good.
Yeah, and their offensive line was worse than Dallas's.
Yeah, they were. That poor Burrow was just getting sacked right and left the whole
Yeah,
play.
seven sacks in a Super Bowl for a second-year quarterback. You can't put a young player in that position coming off an ACL and whatnot.
Yeah.
So Eric, we successfully went from 26 people watching to 16 for that. Cowboys.
Oh no! Listen,
all right, that's your sign. Audible out of that play.
All right. So now, honest to God, now here's a true story. Now, remember, my gaming group is Greg Gillespie, Joe the Lawyer, Tim Shorts, Rob Conley, Matt Jackson. So this is my normal group of people. Sometimes, depending on schedule, some people rotate in, rotate out. So Super Bowl Sunday, we normally play on Monday nights, but there was stuff going on Valentine's Day, and who pays attention to Valentine's Day when you're married? So Rob was running the game, and Rob's like, "Hey, can we all play on Sunday?" I'm like, "Super Bowl." Nobody else had a problem. Nobody else was even paying attention. I was like, "Oh yeah, it's the Super Bowl." Yeah, and it's like, "No, I got to be at my pub. I've got money in some boxes. I got some money on FanDuel. I gotta be part of it." Apparently I'm the only one who paid attention to sports in my gaming group, and that's not only this gaming group. My old gaming group from college is the same way. I'm the only one who has a clue, and I only followed two sports half-heartedly, football and baseball. So God knows, we start talking about sports, and yeah, a lot of our old school gamers start going. Unless it's Blood Bowl, right? I guess we could talk about playing Blood Bowl.
But see, Super Bowl is like a holiday now. I mean, it's not. My wife doesn't know anything about football, but she knows what a Super Bowl party is, a watching party. I mean, that's what I think is it's gone beyond the fact that it's a sporting event to where it's actually a cultural, I don't know, icon holiday at this point.
Yeah, I'm just speaking to John's point there. I love miniatures, and I'm a bit of a Citadel miniature snob. So anybody out there, if you ever have any Citadel Slaughter miniatures and you want rid of them, contact me. I'll definitely buy them. And I like the AD&D line in particular, and I'm getting close. I'm just a couple shy with a few of the monstrous humanoids. That's just a sort of a pet project.
Well, here we are. We're coming up on 9 o'clock, and we haven't given you a chance to rant on Canadian politics yet. So we did pretty good. I'm glad we kept you away from there.
Yeah. So,
well, the balloon kind of popped earlier today, anyway, right? It went from.
Well, it did, but we don't know the reasons why yet.
Right. So I'm not going to summarize. Let's lose the other half of our remaining audience. No, but.
All right.
This is you know what? This is for us anyway. Who cares? I mean, what's going on? This is for us. We're just talking here. I mean, you listen to our conversation. That's about.
Would you rather I talk about TSR?
No. No. I'm tired of hearing about new TSR. I don't want to give. No, we're not giving Lanos.
Yeah, you see?
No. I'd rather talk about ants walking on the ground than Lanos at this point. I'm so tired of him.
Well,
Or Canada being taken over by Castro's son Trudeau. Either one.
Oh no!
Come on, you know what? I'm not a conspiracy guy, and I guess I never looked at pictures of those two together. But at this point, it's absolutely obvious he's Castro's son. And if you disagree with that, I think you're crazy. He is absolutely Castro's son. There's not a doubt in my mind at this point.
Yeah. Well. I'll summarize it as I'll basically make it into a little short minute spiel. If you don't know, so we've had this turmoil in Canada, and this is important if you're a lover of free speech, if you're a lover of democracy and the rule of law. In short, our federal government mandated that truckers get a vaccine. No data was provided to support the notion that truckers going between Canada and the United States are a significant source or a source at all of cross-border COVID.
It's a solo job anyway. Listen, I'm vaxxed, okay? I am vaxxed. I am boosted. I got my own COVID, so I'm super immunized now. But if I'm working by myself in a truck cab, I'm exposing who and what to what?
Goodness knows. It was just a draconian measure. So they forced this mandate. The truckers didn't like it, so they started what they called Freedom Convoy, where they drove to the capital of Ottawa and they parked their trucks in a manner to disrupt traffic flow and to bring attention to their plight. And of course, protest is a valid form of peaceful protest, lawful protest, is a valid form of expression in a liberal democracy. And everyone deserves the right to be heard. And the government refused to dialogue with them. And Trudeau, our prime minister, openly vilified them, called them racists and misogynists, and said they're taking up space. This is not dialogue from a reasonable, mature adult.
My favorite quote from him was, "They have improper thoughts."
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know how any human being alive, whatever your thoughts are, I really, your thoughts are, you might have wrong, your thoughts might not be based in reality, but none of your thoughts can be improper by definition. That's just.
Yes. So basically, he vilified them for wrongthink, and he also vilified them by race and class. So these are, of course, truckers, largely working class folks. And in Canada, you know, if your English is your first language, you're referred to as an Anglophone. If French is your first language, you're referred to as a Francophone. He vilified the Anglophone working class. And then he used this situation with these protesters in downtown Ottawa to invoke the Emergency Measures Act. The Emergency Measures Act, the progenitor was the War Measures Act. So this was the act that we brought in the Second World War to gear up the society for war. It's martial law. So civil rights are suspended. The ability to protest was suspended. He gave the power to banks to unilaterally freeze your assets, your financial assets, without court order or due process. And he gave that power to banks. It's terrifying. And in addition to that, he basically took away the right to protest. So say, for example, your civil rights movement in the 1960s in the United States, all those people would have been thrown in jail for engaging in peaceful protest. And it's really quite unfortunate. And just today, the update is that he rescinded the Emergency Act. Why did he do that? That's really the question. So normally when Parliament voted in favor of it, then it rises to the Senate and the Senate has to ratify it. It's checks and balances. He probably determined that the Senate was going to vote it down, which is really ballsy. And the Senate is normally just a patronage position.
Right.
So once he realized they were going to vote it down, he, within 48 hours of saying the truckers were still a valid threat to the federal government, all of a sudden they were no longer a threat. And of course, I'm quite sure that folks on Twitter and or if you're on my Facebook page, you noticed that a great deal of police engaged in violence against protesters. They were pepper sprayed, they were beaten with batons, they were shot at point blank range with rubber bullets, and people were injured. And they were. It's shaken my belief in the police service in this country. And if you look at the Twitter feeds of the Ottawa police, they're outright lying. There was a woman that was trampled with a walker. So this is an Aboriginal person, Indigenous, with a walker, an old woman that was trampled by mounted police. And the Ottawa police account suggested that someone threw a bike into the legs of the horses, and the video and the photograph show there was no bike present.
There's no bike there.
And they maintain this lie. And I've been trolling the Ottawa Police Service on Twitter, basically saying, listen, I was just following orders, will not save you when this is over. And I expect justice for those peaceful protesters.
I follow police forums, and the local NYPD retirees and active that are on the forums are outraged by what they're seeing by the Canadian police when police show up with no name tags on, no shield number, no badge number, so you can't identify who it is that is committing these acts. You know the acts aren't going to be good ones. NYPD has a history with the Thompson Square Park riots where cops went there and took their shields off. You're not in a good... So the history is there. So when you're not identifying law enforcement, when they can't be identified, you're no longer a democracy. You no longer have the rights that you think you have.
What's happening in Canada right now is what the United States went through, for years. Y'all are just about, 30 or 40 years behind us. But this came to a head during the LA riots when, the LA riots, the reason they happened was police basically manhandled a guy and lied about it. They absolutely lied about it. If it wasn't for a camera, they wouldn't have known, what happened to Rodney King, what actually happened to him. And then they got on the radio afterwards and said some really racist stuff, the gorillas in the mist quote and stuff like that. And so we've kind of gone through this in America where we've we had our moment, maybe every police officer isn't good. Gosh, I never thought about that. I mean, we had our moment when maybe not every preacher is really good, when there's all these scandals in religion. And so we've been through this, and it's just kind of it's interesting to see you guys finally going through this where you're realizing, wait a second, maybe every cop isn't looking out for society, I didn't know this. And so it's been really interesting to talk to my Canadian friends, and except for you, Greg, make excuses for their behavior. I'm like, look, we all did this. We went through this 30 years ago in the United States. We all made excuses for why the police did this or that, but then things would just happen, and it kept piling up, and then more confidential stuff gets leaked, and more, and it just becomes obvious. Okay, yeah. Not every cop is looking out for society. A lot of them are looking out for number one, or they're just doing what they're told to do.
Well, I just want to be, clear. I'm coming from a position of respect for police and the rule of law. And my belief, a very strong belief, was shaken by some of the violence that I saw that was perpetrated against peaceful protesters. There were 100 or hundreds of different ways this could have been resolved by peaceful, mature discussion and reasonableness, and those were thrown out the window and to demonize and vilify working class Anglophones, and I can't abide it. I will speak out on that point at every turn. And I just want to also reiterate, we have a three-party federal system. There's a conservative party, which is really small c conservative.
Right.
We have the Liberal Party, which was small l and is now big L. And then we have the woke party, which is called the NDP, the New Democratic Party. People call them the Not Democratic Party. And so basically, those parties have been compromised by the World Economic Forum. They were going to hijack this Emergency Measures Act to bring in new laws to hijack our liberal democracy and make it into this sort of post-nation state vision that they have for what they see the world doing in the future. This is not what we voted for. Trudeau is in a minority government position. So what that means is if he didn't have the support of the woke NDP, he wouldn't be able to get anything done. So it's a very unfortunate situation. I'm unhappy with how the Conservative Party responded to this. If I was a member of federal parliament, I would have been on the front line of those protesters. I would have taken my beating from those corrupt police officers, and the whole world would have seen how an elected member of parliament is treated shoulder to shoulder with the working class people of this country. And as similar to your country, like, our situation is flipped. The liberals no longer act in favor of the working class. It's the conservatives that are arguing in favor of the working class. And historically, that's not what we would necessarily associate. So it's a very unfortunate situation. And for a federal leader, a national leader, to demonize and vilify people based on their social class and their skin color is absolutely unacceptable in any form.
I think the thing that's scary about this, that would scare me about it is, and I was trying to make this example to somebody, is if this happened in the United States, imagine when MLK was marching in the 60s, and the federal government declared martial law, and they went and called troops in, rounded up MLK and everybody there, and threw them all in prison and took all their bank accounts away. That didn't happen because that happened maybe sometimes it happened at a state level or a county level, but the government quickly stepped in to say, you can't do this. These people have free speech and they are allowed to march, and just because they're protesting and they're protesting things you don't like, that's too bad. And like I said, imagine if Martin Luther King had been subject to those kind of things. That's totally antithetical to the American. It's in our DNA.
Let's deal with the elephant in the room here. If that was a Black Lives Matter protest, the police brutality would not have been perpetrated. That's just the truth of it. And you can think what you want, but Trudeau has come out and said if that was a Black Lives Matter protest, he would have taken it seriously. But because it wasn't, he didn't. And that's just the truth of it here. And the BLM in Canada has been paid off. They've been quiet, dead quiet. The Association for Civil Liberties was dead quiet until just a couple days ago. Amnesty International said that the protest was wrong and that the government was right to invoke the Emergency Measures Act. So, these things, this is the fourth darkest day in Canadian history. The first was the internment of groups during World War I. The second, internment of groups in World War II. The third was the first Trudeau's invocation of the War Measures Act in 1970. And this is the fourth darkest day, and it won't be forgotten. And what the police did and their continued lies is unacceptable, and it's shaken faith in the people and the rule of law.
I think it really opened a lot of people's eyes to what we thought about Canada and the way we treat Canada. I've seen a lot of people just really like, wow, that's happening in Canada. That's crazy, because you just don't expect that out of Canada. Canada is such a reasonable, nice, decent country. It's just so weird. I mean, that's the kind of thing you would have expected, like Trump to do. You expect Trump to declare martial law and beat up protesters and throw them all in prison. Yeah, that would have fit perfectly in with the the way people thought about him. But
the perception.
But the perception, exactly. But to have Trudeau do that it's mind blowing for a lot of people.
Yes, and there's a lot of video. These were unarmed protesters. All they did was basically stand together and took their beatings. And
I mean, imagine the outcry 2 years ago if during the BLM riots in Portland, let's say, if Trump had declared martial law in Oregon, sent in troops, arrested them all, then froze all their bank accounts. The condemnation would have been across the board of every country in the world. I mean, how dare he do this? But that's pretty much what Trudeau just did. And it's shocking. It's absolutely shocking.
I'm very thankful that all our American brothers and sisters stood up and helped fund the trucker convoy. Number one, they took to Twitter and they had their presence felt. American politicians did this. They're good ones, did the same things, and they came out and and hammered Trudeau, and all of this it put pressure on the situation. But I'm quite confident if the Senate was going to vote in favor, we'd still have the Emergency Measures Act. He got the word that it wasn't going to go, and so he rescinded it and he took a knee.
We had a lot of far left politicians that came out against it.
I was going to say that in the United States, it was condemned by the left and the right.
Yes, which is very unusual that they agreed on one thing, but it's just very much part of the American DNA that you have freedom of speech. You can burn a flag. You're allowed to burn flags. You're allowed to disrupt traffic. These are all things.
Inconvenience. It is
you're allowed to be an inconvenience. That's part of free speech. It's not always happy and clean and everybody's happy, as AOC said, who I don't agree with ever, but she was right, is that protests should inconvenience people. That's the whole point of protest.
That's the point. And if you're doing it at inconvenient locations, it will get more attention. I completely agree.
Well, I'm glad, dare I say it, Trudeau blinked. And I'm glad that in the case of Canada, having an upper and lower chamber was the savior. I mean, I listen. I don't care what anybody's political background is. I have always felt that having the Senate in the hands of one party and Congress in the hands of another party is the best way to keep excesses from happening from either side.
It used to work better like that before we came. I mean, unfortunately, as a country, we're so politicized in the United States, but it usually worked better when you had the Senate and the House in different hands because they had to compromise. Yeah. They had to work together and compromise. Unfortunately, now with just how politicized everything is, it's just now it's kind of gridlock. Well, the Senate wants this and the Congress wants that. And we're not going to agree on anything. But it used to be, up until probably 15 years ago, it was good because you didn't have that gridlock.
Well, in the Senate, you had like McCain and Lieberman, a conservative, Republican and a liberal Democrat, and these guys were best friends, would go vacationing together, have their lunches together. They were great friends. They could have political disagreements and yet still have a personal connection. And I think that in general, I think a lot of our, at least in the U.S., we've lost a lot of that ability. Everybody gets defined now by their politics as opposed to who are you as a person. All right, I'm going to disagree on politics. All right, we'll talk it out. I think social media has taught everybody to do this. I can't hear you, but I'm going to talk louder so you can hear me, as opposed to real discussion.
The unfortunate part is politics, you should be able to disagree, but not be disagreeable. And we just quickly move we skip disagree and go to disagreeable. Yeah. And we need to, I think the polarization in the United States is finally manifesting here in Canada. It's come to a head, and it's going to have to be reconciled, and people are going to have to disagree but not be disagreeable moving forward.
I know and Gary can attest this, and Eric too, is that one of the things that we've had issues with over the years is the simple fact of saying that there's no politics allowed in North Texas. We don't do politics, and we've got more vilification for that over the last 5 or 6 years than anything. From both sides, from right side and the left side, because they feel like if you don't choose a stand, you're basically for the other side. But our point has always been, we want you to game, get together and play games. It shouldn't be important if you sit down and the guy that is in front of you voted for Biden or voted for Trump. That shouldn't be what's important. What's important is that you play a game and have fun.
Embrace the commonalities.
Embrace the commonality, not the differences.
I know. I completely agree.
And it used to be, you embrace your commonality and like, hey, we're all Americans. We can disagree, but we're all Americans. We're all Canadians, right? We can disagree, but we're all Canadians. Now it's like, oh no, you define yourself by your political party as opposed to your nation, right? The country you belong to, and that's
we're all in this country or yours. We all have to find a way to get along. The way is to emphasize what we hold in common, not to deconstruct us into our immutable characteristics. That's not a way forward for young people, and it's not a way forward for mature dialogue either, in my humble opinion. And we can be inclusive of all different approaches and political orientations and hash that out. And that's what a democracy is supposed to do. And what you don't like, you are welcome to go and engage in lawful, peaceful protest and not get your ass kicked.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Wow. So, what? I see that Aaron the Pedantic dropped in. He's like, "This is not what I expected."
Our political discussion, our once a year political discussion that we never have.
Well, I hope people hear, like, this is an important topic.
Yes,
and,
it
is.
And we're not, we're and I don't even know if we're really taking sides here, except to say that what's more important is what's the most important thing is freedom of speech.
Yeah, absolutely,
is extremely important, more than anything. I mean, that's like I said, and that's what it's funny because except for Greg, I guess most of my Canadian friends are probably lean another direction, because a lot of them on their pages were really defending what the government was doing. And I just kept bringing up how interesting it is, because America is just so different, because our DNA is different in what we do. And because we have a Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights does different things in America than it does in Canada. And basically the most important thing in the Bill of Rights is, it guarantees you free speech under really almost any circumstance. I mean, the courts have upheld free speech, and like I said, you can burn American flag. That's considered a form of free speech. There's all kinds of different things you can do up until yelling fire in a crowded theater. I mean, but a lot of countries don't have. I mean, we talked about this, Eric, when we were talking about as our buddy Zach Smith, how he was able to sue people in Australia and Canada because they called him names, and he couldn't sue anybody in America because you're allowed to call an idiot in America. You can call people whatever you want to call them. Too bad. So sad. But he was able to win court cases in Australia because people called him an idiot, because they don't really have free speech in Australia.
Well, the thing is, the key takeaway from all of this, and this is the thing I think that's most important. Canada was like that close from having our liberal democracy hijacked for an that was paid for by an outside influence, the World Economic Forum. So just think, we were the Senate away, because if Trudeau kept this Emergency Act in, you would have started seeing the legislation flying fast and furious to get it out before the Emergency Act ended. He would have made some of these emergency acts permanent, like the financial portion of it and others. That's not acceptable. And so we're a cautionary tale. If you love your freedom, if you love freedom of speech and democratic process and the rule of law, regardless of where you stand, fight for those things. Fight for the right of someone who's different from you to have their say.
And I agree. I mean, I had a lot of my friends that were because in Dallas we had BLM protests, and I'm like, sure, and like, oh, how can you be for that? Because I said, look, you can't to split the baby here. You can't pick one issue and say you're for free speech, another one you're not. That's not how this works. I mean, you take the good with the bad when it comes to free speech like that. I said you have to respect one side and the other. If you were to allow one side to do it, you have to allow the other side to do it.
And the irony is the Communist Party of Canada was against the Emergencies Act.
Well, because they know exactly where that was headed, right?
Oh, I mean, brother.
Yeah, they were going to get crushed.
Who'll be on the short end of the stick in the end?
They don't have a seat in Parliament, by the way. I just wanted to point that out. The Communist Party of Canada was against the War Measures Act, so and the establishment of a Trudeau's form of communism moving forward.
Go figure. I mean, listen, when I was a rookie cop in the late 90s, I got sent to every detail, and I got sent to the Million Youth March, and literally we're protecting people who were on their megaphones calling for violence against cops and others, but not direct violence, just general violence. And you know what? Their speech was protected. And as the day went on, my first day, I was like annoyed. Then I was like, you know what? I can be here and I can take the impartial role as a government employee to ensure their rights. I don't have to like what I'm listening to acknowledge the fact that, you know what, there's going to be some other jackass whose right I'm going to have to protect down the line, who's going to be on the opposite side of this, and I'm still not going to like to hear what they say, but they'll have the right to say it. And I mean, that is, like Mike said, a uniquely American right that, yes, other liberal democracies have to some extent, but not to the extent that we here in the States have, and we should never let it go.
One of the most amazing American stories of all time, and I think there was a documentary on that. I'm sure there's a documentary on that because I know I've seen it, was when Nazis marched in, it wasn't Illinois, I want to say Alabama, and they were arrested and defended by Jewish ACLU members, because that's how important the rule of free speech was to these people. You know, I mean, the very thing that they absolutely stood against, Nazis. Yep. They're like, you know what? They're odious, but they have the right to, even though it's ridiculous, they have the right to, you know, march and do their march. And I just think that's just an amazing American story, because I don't know where else that would happen. That would even happen.
Well, you know, leading up to this over the last 2 years, Trudeau has done some stupid things. So he keeps constricting. We have very tough firearm laws, and he keeps clamping down. He used, in the first 2 months of COVID, he used that as to basically, while people are worried about COVID, he slid through this new firearm law because he was trying to be a tough guy, but he was really just infringing on our right to bear arms. And we're a northern nation of hunters. People are allowed to have firearms for that purpose, or if they're target shooting or whatever. He clamped down on that. Then he, the compelled speech issue. So we basically have pre-crime. So if someone has preferred pronouns and you refuse to call them by their favored pronouns, you can be held to account for the words that you do not speak. Now think about that for a minute. The words that you can be held to account for the words you don't speak. It's not right. And then he had a new social media bill that was going to also clamp down on freedom of speech, but it was nixed right before the election that we just finished. So he's been chipping away at our rights and freedoms during his entire, how on earth he's been in for 7 years, I have no idea. And how people keep voting for him, I have no idea.
He's a cute guy, man. He's an attractive man. I don't know.
The guy
you like your
a mile wide and a millimeter deep.
I don't know. He's kind of hot looking. I don't know. Maybe that gets some kind of vote somewhere. An attractive man. I mean, people, you know, you're an attractive man too, Greg. Maybe people buy Barrowmaze because they see a picture of and you're, you know, when you're at the beach and you always, I love when you throw those pictures up, you know, like.
Well, I tell you, if I get pissed off enough,
it's like you're personally laughing at Eric and I when you have those shirtless pics.
Oh, you're not gonna have me shirtless.
Like, yeah, I don't think I can do that. I can't get away with that.
Roll.
Well, hey, you got to make changes as you get older, you know.
So let's sum up. What you got? What do you have coming out this year? Go ahead and roll through it, Greg. What do you got?
Dwarrowdeep will come out in August. That'll be both OSR and 5e. Looking at a monster book, either slightly before or slightly after. And then in 2023, a new rule book that basically takes that D&D 0.75 that we talked about earlier, halfway between BX and AD&D, and codifies it in a clean, sharp, fat-free rule set.
I like it.
I'm extremely interested because I love. See, to me, what I love about the OSR is a lot of times what you're getting somebody's house rules basically. Yeah, one of my favorite, and I've said this a million times, one of my favorite OSR systems is crypts and things, because it takes swords and wizardry, yet it moves in a totally different direction. Okay, you know, no demi-human races. It's kind of a cruel world. It's very Howard. It's probably the most Howard set. It's probably even more Howard than Hyperborea is. And I love stuff like that where people just put their own imprint on the rules. So I'm really interested to see what you come up with in your own personal rule set there.
Great. And I'll also be revising the Barrowmaze.com site. So it'll be a site with meat shields. So if you don't know, meat shields is the hireling generator that's available at Barrowmaze.com. And it was sort of a community collaboration years ago. And so that'll be part of the website, but it'll be, you'll come into Barrowmaze and have all the stuff for the books and a blog portion and stuff like that as well moving forward.
Wait, look at this! Look at this, Eric. Steve Winter pops in.
I know, I saw that.
And because Greg's on the show, because this isn't for us.
It isn't for you and me.
No, he doesn't pop in for you and me. But Greg's on the show.
Steve was very kind with me. He's taken time with me in the past. He even let me harangue him by phone years ago, and I really appreciated it. And I'm very thankful.
He is a great guy, but
he is.
But yeah, he believe me, this is for you, Greg, not for Eric and I. He won't pop in with Eric and I here. So Greg brings all the milkshakes to the yard. I mean, his milkshake brings all the boys. To the yard.
I'm honored. It's tremendous that he's here.
John, I'm not going to give away. Not a secret. I announced it on a blog. I guess yesterday. We'll have Venga the day before.
Speaking of free speech, even people like Wenger get to be on our show and his stuff. So yeah, that'll be interesting. So.
And Marcelo has a question before we round this out. How would you compare D&D 0.75 with OSE advanced rules for Necrotic Gnome? Which, by the way, I don't know. It's probably at 500,000 right now at the
BM. It got 250,000 within an hour. It's crazy. Yeah.
I'm not huge on digest books, so there's that. The art style is not to my personal aesthetic. To each their own. It's just not for me. And I need the fonts to do different things. So, and then again, as Mike pointed out earlier, it's taking effectively my house rules and that I used, that I play with, that I've written Barrowmaze and Forbidden Caverns and HighFell and Dwarrowdeep for, and it's codifying that. So that's really what it's about.
Wow, folks, we're setting constant new high water marks on these live streams.
We keep having really interesting guests one after another.
We keep on going over 2 hours. Over 2 hours. God bless. Listen, Greg, huge thank you. You're always fun to have on. We won't wait a year this time.
Always.
Thank you both very much.
When Dwarrowmaze comes out, or maybe even before North Texas, we will pop you on again.
Sure, that'd be great.
Ooh, yeah,
and I won't be under martial law.
You'll be a freedom fighter by then. You'll have a beret, and a scarf and everything. You'll be from an underground basement somewhere. It'll be awesome.
Yeah, I'll be broadcasting my counter anti-government
there you go.
message from my basement.
Bunker.
That'll be awesome.
We'll arm you with Nerf guns. It is Canada, by the way. You can't go beyond that. You guys, thank you, Bill. Rapinathic, White Plume Mountain, there. Rapinathic. What kind of mega dungeon is that shit anyway? Sorry, Bill. I ran it. It was good. But
what did they say? I want to know what White Plume Mountain said about us. I don't know if they said anything.
I don't know.
Oh dear.
I love the cover. The back cover is my favorite on the monochrome.
There you go. Folks, I want to thank everybody who showed up in the chat. Not only were your questions and comments good, I didn't get to all of them. I apologize, but you guys were just too verbose today for me to.
We probably had one of the most watchers of any live stream we've ever had today by far.
Yeah, no, that's
great.
It was really good, really consistent. Yes, we delved into the real world. We don't normally do so, but it was very timely and something that's been going on, and we've had discussions with Greg. Mm-hmm. This was something that, it applies to all of us. If you're watching this, you're probably in a Western democracy, okay? And you have to really appreciate the rights that you have. And whether it's...
don't take them for granted.
Don't take them for granted. And listen, whether it's the far left or the far right, there are likely politicians in power that want to stay in power. And your rights could be at risk at some point. Just be cognizant. You can't protect them if you don't pay attention to what rights you have and which ones are possibly being infringed. Yeah, we didn't plan on going off in this area, but I think it was very relevant to having Greg on.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak to it, and thank you very much.
No problem. No problem. And we love hearing about the new goodies coming out, new mega dungeons.
We want to be the one to release the new information when more information comes out. We want to be the official source.
Sneak peek once again.
Oh, looks so cool.
There we go.
Very cool.
Folks, my COVID spiel. Things are looking better. I'm gonna piss somebody off by saying this. I don't care whether you're vaxxed or unvaxxed. I don't care whether you wear a mask or don't wear a mask. I do suggest that if you haven't talked to a medical professional and you aren't vaccinated yet, you talk to a medical professional that knows your medical history and be guided by their advice. All right? That, to me, I'm going to do that common sense thing. But it's not one size fits all. We should know that by now. As for other stuff, be safe, be well. God bless. Roll those dice. I will be back again tomorrow. Live stream on Friday, 8 p.m. with Joe the Lawyer. Rach and I will be back Saturday, 8 p.m. She will be doing a video before that about her heart monitor device that she has to wear for 4 days this week because her GP just wants to make sure about stuff. But we're going to go into some of that. And other than that, holy shit. We retained an audience after talking about fucking football for 10 minutes. Can't believe it. Wow, your game is really...
Football is good stuff.
I'm looking forward to seeing everybody at North Texas.
Yes.
Amen. We will be there.
And everybody at TotalCon, have a good time this weekend. Everybody that's at TotalCon. Looks like a lot of our friends are there.
Yes. Including Zach.
Yep.
Yeah. Jen's going to probably watch this, not Zach.
Yeah.
All right. Laters.
Later, everybody.